Toy Story 3, it seemed that Pixar had hit its climax. John Lasseter and crew were bombarded by the faithful, asking what would be next on the horizon for the world of CGI animation. By this time, even with so many successful films, shorts, and awards, the competition was officially here and eager to knock Pixar off of the pedestal. DreamWorks, since its inception, had been on Pixar's coattails, gaining ground ever so slightly. With one of their newest franchise hits, Kung Fu Panda, it had seemed that both the studios were neck and neck for the first time since 1998. Universal had also gotten into the game in 2010, introducing a new pop culture phenomenon which painted the movie world yellow. Despicable Me gave birth to Universal's own animation company Illumination Entertainment, and the lovable blue overall-wearing minions were stealing the hearts of children and adults everywhere. Even a new company, Laika Entertainment, had appeared on the animation scene, returning to the world of stop motion with films like Coraline and Paranorman, taking the ideas of Ralph Bakshi years before, for that animation didn't always have to gear itself towards children. 2011 would also be a starting point for the Disney Animation Studios to rise from the ashes of its early millennium decline. The 51st Disney Classic would be the third official sequel to the library, and it would feature one of the most beloved Disney characters of all time. Winnie the Pooh would hit theaters in summer of 2011, and Pixar would follow up Toy Story 3 with a sequel of their own. Cars 2, of course, would follow the 2006 blockbuster and would reunite Owen Wilson, Larry the Cable Guy, and Bonnie Hunt. Even with the losses of Paul Newman and famous comedian George Carlin, the cast would add Mychal, Emily Mortimer, and John Turturro. The story would also take a twist and turn the film into a spy thriller, putting the lovable doofus Mater into the spotlight as the main character instead of Lightning McQueen. The film would feature beautiful animated cities based on the actual famous international cities, plenty of racing celebrity cameos, and an environmental message about alternative energy use. While the film would smash 2011 box office records, it would not be well received by critics. Pixar would be dealt its first major blow. The critics would be quoted saying that Cars 2 is visually appealing as any other Pixar production, but all that dazzle can't disguise the rusty storytelling underneath the hood. There would be another Pixar film to hit theaters that holiday season, making it the very first year to feature two films from that company. This film was called Newt, a story of two endangered blue-footed lizards living in a laboratory, being forced to mate to carry on their species. The problem was that the male and female lizard hated one another. There was much excitement surrounded by this film thanks to some leaked artwork and early CGI screenshots. But in a flash, the film vanished from the 2011 fourth quarter releases. No one knows the true reason as to why Newt was pulled. Some would link it to the 2011 releases of Nickelodeon's Rango and the Fox Blue Sky release Rio, which had a very similar plot to Newt. Another would be Andrew Stanton, the designated director of Newt, coming up with a brand new idea that he felt would trump Newt, and would see a theatrical release in a few years down the line. At this point, Pixar has not mentioned a possible release date for Newt, and until this very day, it will be known as the only Pixar film never to be completed. Before Toy Story 2's release, Pixar had made it clear that they would not be a studio that would create films for the purposes of generating sequels, yet many believed that now, with Pixar being a part of the Walt Disney Company, it would be corporation greediness that would now drive the company. 2012 would bring a brand new story to the Pixar library, as well as its very first fairy tale story and its very first princess. Brave was a story that Pixar never tackled, as it was usually the classic animation that dealt with the princesses. Merida, however, was not your typical Disney princess. She was brash, unladylike, and always up for an adventure. She also broke many traditional molds of the typical princess story, about how she had no intentions for marriage. Rather, she wanted to find her own path and figure out how she wanted to lead her life. There were many other firsts for Pixar with Brave, including their very first female director, Brenda Chapman, and a newcomer to the music scene for Pixar, Patrick Doyle. The cast included Billy Connolly, Emma Thompson, and Boardwalk Empire's Kelly MacDonald. The film would see high box office numbers and even take home the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. This was actually considered an upset, as it had gone up against two other Disney animated films which had also received amazing box office numbers. The 50-second animated animated classic Wreck-It Ralph, and the Tim Burton stop-motion film Frankenweenie. It was a surprise as the critics considered Brave an average film at best. The late Roger Ebert said that kids would enjoy it, but the film would not have the adult appeal of a movie like Toy Story or Finding Nemo. Other critics felt that Pixar was heading towards a slight decline, releasing films that were considered average among many. The following year would not help Pixar much as they would introduce the very first Pixar prequel, Monsters University. Pixar had no intentions of creating a second Monsters movie, but after the 2006 deal, Disney had opposite feelings and forced them to follow up the film. With Pixar's refusal, Disney tasked their Circle 7 division to make the sequel film. After seeing the disaster that Circle 7 had created, the team decided to create a prequel rather than a sequel. With positive feelings towards the reunion of Mike and Sully, voiced once again by John Goodman and Billy Crystal, the film would show the fans a new chapter in the Monsters, Inc. story, showing how two best buddies started off as the worst of enemies. While the trailers looked promising, the film would be just another average Pixar film. Monsters University would practically be lost that year thanks to its parent company at year's end, thanks to a certain film telling everyone to let it go. The 53rd Disney animated classic Frozen, based on the fairy tale The Snow Queen, would be a landmark achievement pulling Disney animation out of the dark and back into the light. Frozen would go on to win numerous awards and bring back the Disney animated musical, which would shatter music sales in 2013. Disney would also see the acquisition of Lucasfilm and Marvel Entertainment. Disney would go straight to work, announcing that Star Wars would be returning to the big screen with a long-awaited sequel trilogy, and Disney would announce its 54th Disney animated classic, and that it would be based on a Marvel comic book. At this point, Disney was no longer the king of animation. Rather, the company had reached a godlike status. Pixar, while along for the ride after seeing box office success from average films, was suddenly fading into the shadows. At this point, Pixar was in need of its own renaissance. Pixar was at odds with its own parent company in 2013. After a string of average films, Pixar knew that there had to be something new cranked out. The Disney Animation Studio had seen box office success with their animated musical Frozen. Frozen would eventually surpass one of Pixar's highest-grossing films, Finding Nemo. Even the shorts that put Pixar's foot in the door were being upstaged by its parent company. Recent shorts such as La Luna, Blue Umbrella, and Lava would see the animation studios upstage them with innovative shorts such as Get a Horse, Paperman, and Feast. Pixar would bring some familiar faces back to the fans for 2 years in a row with 2 half-hour CGI Toy Story specials on network television. With the basis of continuity from Toy Story, ABC would air Toy Story of Terror and The Toy Story That Time Forgot. Pixar would soon announce 2 new films in the works. The first one was The Good Dinosaur, which already had How I Met Your Mother star Neil Patrick Harris attached as the lead character, a friendly dinosaur named Arlo. John Lasseter gave details about the film's plot, about how a dinosaur society would become more of an agrarian society, meaning farmers, after evolution. It would be very tough to get this project off the ground, as the script would constantly go back for rewrites and directors would change. Others working on the project would eventually depart to work on other Disney films, including Brad Bird's directed Disney fantasy Tomorrowland. Disney would have their 23rd annual convention, and Pixar would be one of the main events. Along with The Good Dinosaur and a film involving emotions in a young girl's head, there were a string of nothing but sequels in Pixar's future. While some of them did look promising, than others, it would not be thought of too highly. Some would even wonder what Pixar had become, and soon The Good Dinosaur would cause all of these projects to get pushed back. It would also be that in 2014 there would be no Disney Pixar film released in theaters. It would be the very first time since the summer of 2006 that moviegoers would be without a Pixar film. John Lasseter would see the release of the 54th animated classic Big Hero 6, and like Frozen, it would see tremendous box office success as the second Disney Renaissance would roll on. 2 more canon classics would be announced as well. Pixar, on the other hand, was now left with a huge task. 2015 would be the very first time that 2 Pixar films would be hitting theaters. While The Good Dinosaur was set for a holiday season release, it would be the former follow-up that would now be the headliner for the summer. As a child, Director Pete Docter relocated with his family to Denmark, and while his sisters had an easy time adjusting to their new surroundings, he felt that he was judged constantly by his peers. While other kids were interested in sports, Docter sat alone drawing, a hobby that would eventually lead him to animation. Docter would actually wonder how emotions would in fact be reacting in any shape or form, and this led to a great idea for the next animated film. He began researching information about the mind and consulted well-known psychologists who studied emotions. One of the psychologists identified 6 core emotions: anger, fear, sadness, disgust, joy, and surprise. Docter found that surprise and fear were too similar, which basically left him with 5 emotions to build characters around. The smash success of Docter's 2009 film Up encouraged those at Pixar to allow Docter to create another film with a more sophisticated story. Inside Out is the very first Pixar film without the input of co-founder Steve Jobs, who died in 2011. It also lacked extensive input from John Lasseter, who was now more focused on resurrecting the Walt Disney Animation Studios. There was a lot riding on Inside Out, but the film was starting to shape up. The 5 main roles would be voiced by some of the top comedic names in Hollywood: Amy Poehler, Bill Hader, Phyllis Smith, Mindy Kaling, and Louis Black. Other cast members included Diane Lane and Carol McLaughlin, and Richard Kind, who had already lent his voice to Pixar back in 1998's A Bug's Life. Inside Out was bright, colorful, and had a plot that would appeal greatly to families. Much like Up, Inside Out would have much more mature tones and be able to grab the attention of adults, but still manage to get the kids in the theater. The marketing for the film was also something different, as it ended up being a culmination of all the past Pixar films, showing how emotions linked them all together. Inside Out would be a hit in theaters in June of 2015. Pixar had found the magic once again, as Inside Out would be one of the highest grossing films of 2015. Although it would be Pixar's first one not to debut at number 1, its opening weekend gross was still one of the biggest for a Pixar original film, breaking The Incredibles' record. The studio's second biggest hit of all time behind Toy Story 3, and the biggest weekend debut for a film that did not debut at number 1. It would still make its mark come award season, as it took the Golden Globe and the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. The Good Dinosaur would come to theaters in November of 2015, and it would be welcomed with a mixed bag of reviews. The high point in the film was its animation, which featured photography and video records of lush landscapes with animation added into the footage. The filmmakers wanted nature to be the antagonist for the main character, Arlo. In order to achieve it, they needed a large sense of realism. The filmmakers traveled to the American Northwest, spending time in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Ventura, Oregon, and southern Montana. The geographical data provided a foundation for what the team was given to build on, and they had the freedom to shoot in every direction that they wanted to make the world feel big and real. In addition, The Good Dinosaur featured a brand new 3-dimensional cloud feature. In previous Pixar films, the clouds were painted onto the sets, but due to the rest of what the film had to offer, The Good Dinosaur would be Pixar's lowest grossing film to date. However, the short before the film, Sanjay's Super Team, would receive more praise and would even include a Best Animated Short nomination at that year's Oscars. After the subpar release of The Good Dinosaur, fans were not pleased with what was next for Pixar. Between titles such as Finding Dory, Cars 3, and Toy Story 4, it seemed that Pixar had officially given in to a mix of plain old moneymakers and a desperate cry for help. Nevertheless, it was inevitable that these films were going to hit theaters, like it or lump it. Disney had already seen box office bliss in 2016 with its 55th animated classic Zootopia, a beautifully animated film with quick wit and a very strong message about differences in people. Disney also announced many teasers for the 56th classic Moana, which would hit theaters that holiday season. In the summer of 2016, Pixar's Finding Dory would hit theaters, taking place 1 year after the events of the first film that had hit theaters 13 years prior. The sequel would also be directed by Andrew Stanton, the director of the first film. Albert Brooks and Ellen DeGeneres would grace the screen as Marlin and Dory once again. This time around, the film would revolve around Dory and a faint memory of her having a family. The film would also feature a whole new bunch of colorful characters, each with a unique feature to capture the message of the film. Stars like Ed O'Neill, Ty Burrell, Diane Keaton, and Eugene Levy lent their voices to these brand new cast members. Miraculously, Finding Dory was a success, with esteemed critical reviews and becoming one of the highest grossing films of the summer. At this point, Finding Dory is the 8th highest grossing film in the American box office, with over $420 million. While there were many fans of Finding Nemo that were skeptical of a sequel, especially after so long, with a very important message about people with disabilities and a strong, brilliantly animated short in Piper, we received another stunning animated feature. All those doubters can safely say that Finding Dory was a strong sequel. Pixar at this point is unsure about what the future will hold, but for now the future does look bright. 2017 will feature 2 new films, a 3rd and final installment to the popular Cars franchise, and a brand new story called Coco, based around Mexico's Dia de Muertos. 2018 will feature a 4th installment to the Toy Story franchise, and while many fans are extremely disappointed, Pixar has assured fans of the relevance of this story and that there is still one more chapter to be told. 2019, however, will feature a long-awaited sequel to the 2004 superhero epic, The Incredibles 2. It is hard to imagine that 30 years has gone by since the beginning of Pixar, what started as a few people with a dream to use computers to tell stories through the beauty of animation. While there have been many bumps in the road, the dream still prevails, because as long as there are spirited minds and hearts filled with passion, it was as the great Walt Disney said himself, "Animation can create anything the mind of man can conceive." Pixar had made it possible by showing the world how to do it in a whole new way, and like the first time, it all started with a mouse.
The rhythm gets stronger, there's nothing wrong